This is Across Divides, a series of stories and experiences from communities across the island of Ireland as they meet shared challenges and consider opportunities for collaboration. Find out more at icommunityhub.org.
I'm Susie Can, and on this episode, we're going to explore the idea of just transition in relation to all the changes that communities, that livelihoods are going to have to make on this island, and we have to figure out how we face that, how we educate about it, how we make the transition to be equitable and just. So I'm joined by some guests today that are already working in different areas of this across the island of Ireland. I have with me Aoife Kirk, who is the project coordinator of Connecting Communities with Peatlands, and that's a project that's being rolled out in partnership with Irish Rural Link and the Community Wetlands Forum. I also am joined by Shane Campbell, who's the CEO at Irish Central Border Area Network, and they've just embarked on a people's transition process. And I'm also joined by Morgan O'Toole, Regional Development Officer at Cooperation Ireland. She's responsible for the All Ireland Schools and Climate Change project that's in partnership with the Education Authority of Northern Ireland, Alison, and EcoEd for All. So from Waterford, from Dublin about a Midlands project, and from the border regions, hopefully our conversation's going to be a very interesting one today. Aoife, I might go back and start with you. Can you tell us about the project and how it's evolved and how it fits into the concept, or even for listeners, what is just transition?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I'll start with what is just transition before I launch into anything about the project, because I feel like as if that's a concept that we hear the words, but do we really know what it means? And I come across that a lot in the Midlands, that this policy of just transition is being applied to these communities, to people, to employers, and they may never have come across the phrase before, and they really don't know what it is. So I suppose just transition is really kind of a policy focused on climate action, that we're moving away from using fossil fuels. It's usually used in terms of our energy usage, but also in the broader environmental side of things as well, as we're making those changes to be more climate friendly. But I suppose what's really important to remember about just transition, that it's not just about making those energy changes that impact, employment, which is obviously really big and key in the Midlands with the closure of Bordnamona sites and energy generation plants. So, it's not just about that. It's about looking at how do we bring communities and societies along in that change. And that's where the just aspect of just transition comes in, that it needs to be fair, that it needs to take into consideration everyone living in that environment, that it's not just going to impact employers and employees, but it's going to impact the communities that have grown up around these businesses. And they need a space at the table to advance the change, so that they have their voices as part of that and that they are heard, that it's not a tick box exercise, that they are, sitting with the big players, and that their voices and their experiences and what they want going forward into the future for their communities to have a sustainable community and what they think it should look like. So that's where I suppose Connecting Communities with Peatlands comes in as a project that is very much focused around peatland communities. As we know, the Midlands are absolutely covered in peatlands, mostly raised bog. And the Community Wetlands Forum have been kind of working in that area with community groups for the last, I'd say about 5 years. And their membership and network has grown to encompass all of these various community groups, ranging from heritage groups to restoration groups, and just, other groups that are interested in recreational activities as well on their peatlands. So we have this wide membership and community within the Midlands that are eager for change, that are really active. And as part of connecting communities with peatlands, we're engaging with those community groups to build their capacity and to empower them to be part of the just transition changes and give them the skill set to be at the table, to be able to voice their thoughts for the future, to be able to guide their communities into the future. And what that looks like in a practical sense, rather than, you know, something that's kind of in the clouds and we can imagine it and think, oh, well, this is great. But in a practical sense, that means delivering specific trainings to community groups that they feel they need to empower themselves to move forward. So that can take the form of learning more about the biological and ecological side of peatlands if they don't already understand that aspect of it, but also more practical things, particularly conflict resolution training, leadership building, succession planning for their community groups. Those practical things are really important as well, as alongside learning about the biodiversity and climate importance of preserving our peatlands.
Thank you. That's amazing. And Shane, I'm sure you connect with that, the empowerment of communities and communities needing different interventions, different ways of being worked with and supported. Do you want to tell us a bit about your work over time, but also what led you to choose to engage with the people's transition process?
Sure, Susie. Yeah, we can relate a lot to what Aoife's doing in the Midlands, in the sense of connections, and connections been so important, particularly in the area that we're working within, which is the border region. So what we have is a project that is cross-border, it's cross-community, it's intergenerational, but it's in a small geographic area in the border in which we're connecting communities from around about 6 settlements in that area. The story really of how we've come to this project, I suppose, started when we were developing a new strategy for the border area. We released that about this time last year, and it's called the Framework of Regional Priorities. We're a cross-border partnership, and it's a strategy that's really delivered for the 8 member councils of our area. So we have a region, we call it the Central Border Region. It's got the county councils of Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, Cavan and Monaghan, and then the Northern Ireland district councils of Fermanagh and Omagh, Mid-Ulster and Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon. So it's a huge expanse of the border region. And we developed a new strategy, but it was very much about responding to the challenges of these times, the challenges of Brexit, obviously, in the border region, the pandemic, and also the climate challenges. So in developing the strategy, we very much built it on the Sustainable Development Goals as the foundation. And we recognise that a strength of our area is the landscape, the countryside, the waterways. It's our environment. But this strategy is different from what we would have delivered before, where obviously it does have elements of economic development, indeed, infrastructure, etc. But for this strategy, we've had a greater focus on the green environment, the outdoors, and the appreciation that we're probably seeing more so of our local environs in the last couple of years by virtue of the pandemic and its circumstances and restrictions of movement. And we're looking at our own local areas more and appreciating it more. And we recognise, well, look, this is maybe something that we really need to do because it's a key asset and it's something we need to value more. But it's something that if we respectfully use, well, we can achieve a lot from it. So in the business of our work and promoting the strategy, we became aware of um, issues around the area of Loch McNean. There's 2 lochs, there's the upper loch and the lower loch, and that's on the border intersection of counties Cavan, Leitrim and Fermanagh. It's an area of 6 settlements: Belcoo, Blacklion, Cashel, Glenfarne, Killesher and Kilty Clogher. Beautiful area. Um, but the lochs suffer from poor and bad water quality respectively. And we've been engaging with stakeholders in trying to develop solutions because they're keen to develop new projects and canoe trails, blueways, etc. But there is that disadvantage or that challenge for the area in the sense of its water quality. But one thing that we were missing was the community engagement piece. It's there, but we wanted to build that more. We wanted to bring the community front and center really into it and to empower them in looking at, well, what have we got locally? What's our key assets and how do we use them? And in the course of our work, we became aware of the project that Task had led on, and Task, the think tank for social change in Dublin, are our partners in the project. And Task, and this is obviously something, Susie, you yourself are very familiar with, have done some fantastic work in projects in Ardra, in Donegal, and also in Phibsborough in Dublin. And we thought, well, is that not something that we could take to the border region and pilot it? Is that not something that we could even take to that Loch McNean area and see, well, can we engage the local community, provide opportunities for them to have meaningful engagement with stakeholders, to identify what the issues are, and then develop their potential solutions? And yeah, we can very much relate to the work there of IFA in terms of that transition and that people's transition towards having a future that is less dependent on carbon, but at the same time not being a burden to any particular sector, but where the benefits obviously that we hope would come from this can be shared by all. So we're in the process now of developing that project now. We're recruiting people onto it, and it's called Border Transition.
Fantastic, Shane, thank you. And Morgan, the idea of education as a part of empowerment, of understanding the issues of climate justice and equality and climate action, that's something you've been working on an all-island basis with young people. Would you tell us how that feeds into this story of the young people who are basically inheriting all of these issues and will be working on them for most of their lives in one way or another?
Yeah, that's exactly it, is that young people are inheriting what we're creating now. So having them be part of the process of the solutions in the future is what we're trying to initiate. And Cooperation Ireland, in partnership with Alison, the online education platform, and EcoEd for All, are subject matter experts in climate change, and the Educational Authority of Northern Ireland. We're working together to not only enhance environmental education through these online courses, but also to foster collaboration cross-community and cross-border. And what that looks like, this is our pilot year. So for our pilot year, we have 6 schools in Northern Ireland that are partnered with 6 schools in the Republic of Ireland. And they will do 5 different courses, up to 5 courses that are on a range of different environmental topics, such as biodiversity, energy, transportation. And they build the foundation of climate change knowledge. And then once that foundation has been made, they'll work with their partners, either in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, or cross community, to build a social action project of their own design, something that affects their community, affects themselves personally, something that they're passionate about. We guide them and we help them, but really they're working together to better their own community and to better our global environment. And what's really great about that is that they're beginning to take ownership at a very young age, and they're also learning the importance of idea sharing and working together.
Amazing. I suppose one of the things that I wanted to ask all of you, is around that word even, transition, that we're talking about one way we are all now living, and the idea that we will not recognise how, we'll be living in future. Our young people will definitely see a very different way of living. But all of you've talked about bringing that to communities in some way, and crossing different perspectives, I suppose, as part of it. And I'm curious about, Aoife, you said you use conflict resolution is one of the key trainings in this. And I suppose, when we're asked to make huge changes, presumably there's resistance. Presumably it's not, something that we can all just walk into. And I know that land use would be presumably part of what is coming up in your areas, and that may be something across Shane's as well. But would you just talk a bit about that, that notion that the change is pretty monumental, and that how do we fostering that collaboration like Morgan's talking about? How's that going? Are you
Yeah,
finding it,
good good question. Yeah, I suppose one of the biggest uh, things around this that is so, I think, different in the Irish context to maybe the rest of Europe, is that we have a cultural attachment and identity around peatlands, and turf cutting. And, whether it's domestic or industrial, particularly in the Midlands, the industrial aspect and the economic benefits that Bord na Móna brought to the area. And, local, small, very small towns with really small populations, have taken pride, obviously, in the role that they played in the building of the Republic of Ireland. That we could be energy independent to some extent by using industrial peat extraction. And there's massive pride and attachment to that. And I suppose now that this change that we're looking at, the impact of fossil fuels, we understand this now. The feedback that I tend to get is that people feel as if they're being forgotten about, that their contribution wasn't important, and maybe that they feel a little bit less valued. And I think one of the most important things that we do need to do before we, I suppose, say goodbye to our fossil fuel past is to embrace the importance of those people and what they did and their contribution, because it wasn't for nothing. It was fantastic for those communities. It brought life to those communities. It gave employment. It provided security, and those were monumental to have. In the 50s and 60s in Ireland, and that really needs to be embraced before we go forward. So embrace our heritage, tell those people that yes, we still value you. We still value you, and there are within the Midlands at the moment. There are various oral history projects ongoing. Very heritage focused projects around conserving that history. And, these people don't want to be kind of forgotten and left behind as we move forward into this new age of renewables and peatland restoration, where, we're no longer going out onto the bogs in the summer and cutting turf. You're not having those summer evenings where, you're out with your neighbour and it's an event. So it's about, I suppose, holding on to those traditions without doing any damage to our environment, and saying that these things are still valuable, these things are still really important, and they're so important to our cultural identity, and moving forward. So I think, of course we get resistance. Of course you get resistance because you're challenging people's core beliefs and their core values that they have grown up with their entire lives. And they absolutely would feel like it's a challenge to their identity and who they are as a person. And you can't take that away from somebody, but you need to bring them along, and you need to start a conversation, and not a accusatory kind of conversation, pointing fingers at people saying, you're wrong and I'm right. It's not black and white. It just isn't. It's nuanced. It's grey. And it's about having these conversations. And we do have a number of members that have come from a turf cutting background that have, over the years, are now peatland protectors, which is really, really fantastic to see. And they know the land and they understand the land. And even now, we're getting groups that are still cutting turf that are saying, well, we want to be the deciders in our future, because, as Morgan was saying, like what we do now is what we're passing on to our future generations. And they're very aware of that. So the conversation is getting through, around those issues, and it's getting through, and they want to be the people to guide that for their communities and be the first ones to step up and take action and to start moving away from turf cutting and providing an alternative, but also still retaining that identity and that connection to the bog.
Yeah. Jane, is there lessons to be learned about like that amazing transformation from one identity of being a turf cutter to being a peatland protector. You know, the idea that we're not static, we don't stay, our identity as a community, our identity, our traditions are always evolving. Are there lessons that you think the work that you've been doing in the past and the work you're trying to engage in now brings to this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be applied across a lot of places. Sorry, was that for myself or Shane?
We're in conversation now, so you can jump in if you relate to these these elements. Please just see where it's bringing you. But I was asking Shane that, but it's grand.
Yeah, well then Shane, you go. I've done enough.
Yeah, I think the connections are absolutely critical. And the challenge that you have in an area such as ours is borders. And we often talk about that it's not just that idea of the statutory, physical, political border, but it's the border of the mind. And what we try and do is facilitate and open up conversations and dialogue um, about breaking down these mindsets and about finding new ways to look at things and to embrace opportunities. We've been doing that for 27 years. Other cross-border partnerships are working a bit longer than us as well. And well, obviously it's a challenge. It's not easy, but there are and there have been and there will be significant inroads continue to be made on that as we break down barriers. One of the ways that we've looked at this project, and one of our stakeholders have been referring to this as through our strategy work in this project, is about thinking about this differently and thinking about this as landscapes of collaboration. That you have more in common with your northern or southern neighbours than you may have with others in other parts of the island, in Dublin or in Belfast or elsewhere in places that you may associate within your own jurisdiction. And these are your neighbours, and you've got more in common with them when it comes to local community development issues and needs. But that your own locale might be actually quite small, and that therefore, or even you as an individual or a local community might find some of these challenges quite daunting. So that idea of the collective or the critical mass, or bringing other communities together and considering something in a small sub-region is really important. And in doing that, it brings back that wider sense of the community, that the community extends from both sides of the border, and it's in two traditions or three or four traditions, and you bring in the migrant communities, etc. And it's about, well, it's finding out that we need our neighbours, and that if you're dealing with an issue about the environment or an issue of climate change, well, that can transcend political differences, and it should do. And with that can come this can-do attitude. And if you empower people and talk to them about something like the restoration of the maintenance or the association of peatlands, or whether it's to do with the water courses in around the lakes in Lough Macneen and that environment, because you can actually deliver a lot together, and you can meet greater goals. So that's what we're promoting, but it also is about engaging with the stakeholders and providing opportunities for not just the communities but the stakeholders on both sides of the border. And I can emphasise with the work of Morgan as well, and the good work Cooperation Ireland, and engaging stakeholders from both jurisdictions, and we do the same. For example, something as simple as if you're trying to seek funding for the improvement of a water course in either the south or the north, rivers, wildlife, etc. At the end of the day, it does not know borders. They flow on through it. However, if you're trying to deliver some work on a water course or some improvement, and that's put in front of a funder in one of the jurisdictions, and they go, oh, hold on, but this flows into the north, the funding application and the criteria that's been marked on can become problematic. And therefore, we're seeing that these applications, some applications in some instances, obviously, then are being marked down and they're not being supported. And an opportunity is lost. So, what it requires is that adaptive attitude of the authorities, of the agencies, to work together, to think of things in common, that common solutions can be provided. If each side of the border and those respective agencies can realize that, yeah, okay, the border shouldn't be a problem and we should be open to trying to find a solution and not just finding a difficulty with ticking the box about match funding or about who else is involved in the other jurisdiction or what are they doing. And I think that's where the community is important, is an engagement with those stakeholders and making those points heard. And on an issue such as climate action, in which we're all animated about, and we've got this single ecological entity, this island, we've got common challenges to face, and we're better doing it together and doing it respectfully in a way that is not going to become an issue of division, but that we can work together in cooperation to our mutual benefit.
Yeah, and I mean, Morgan, that I was thinking the cooperation and particularly the direction of cooperation towards a social action, to trying to look at justice, equality, or in a social sense. I was actually thinking that as I heard Aoife saying people were proud of what they did 50 years ago or what they did, and I thought, well, isn't that really what you're trying to foster, that feeling with the young people that we have a shared challenge and we, like I was always imagining, what success looked like future times when you could look back at those young people and saying they'd be like the ones that Aoife's talking about, saying this was our contribution at this time. This was significant. We were able to do something. I'm just wondering, as you're listening to that with the communities, is that resonating with that, with, that call to the young people?
Oh, absolutely. Especially what Shane was saying, these issues, climate change, these transcend borders, these transcend communities. And sure, there are things that are community specific, but at the end of the day, each thing kind of falls onto the next community and everything is kind of intertwined. And I think that young people see that. And I think that they're genuinely interested at this age at making an impact and making a difference and being part of the story of change. And the way that we're getting them, like you said, the call to action, they are designing and leading their own social action projects, and they're working with members of the community to make it kind of bespoke and to make it their own. And then they can see how that will impact the communities across the border or the communities across the island in general. This is an all-island program that we're working on, All Island Schools for Climate Action. So we're trying to make sure that the students are speaking to each other from all corners of the island to make their communities even better.
Yeah, I suppose then, all of the things that you've all been talking about are incredibly positive interventions trying to empower the young people, empower the communities in the Midlands and, in the border regions. What are you up against? And Shane, you started to touch on it about the different funding criteria, but I'm thinking as well about the direction of travel as society and where communities may be excluded from this transition or who benefits, because there are other actors who would probably see the resources that are needed for carbon sequestration or other kinds of ways to, engage with the economy on the island. And as communities, tackle this, are you coming up against barriers about who benefits, who is actually part of an equitable transition?
Personally, Susie, no, not in this project, I suppose. But in general work, if you apply probably what we're going to come upon in this project, you're going to come upon those challenges of rural development, about the appreciation of the challenges that rural communities face. And we continue to have those challenges because we don't have the chimney pots that the big towns and the big cities have. That's going to, I suppose, grab more attention of those in government. But what we're trying to do is to create like the others on the call, pilot projects here, that will make a difference that you can then sell to government and try and get them mainstreamed, or that greater appreciation of what, with a few euros and a few pounds, you can actually make a difference at a local level. You can't do this. You can't bring about climate actions, or you cannot bring about changes at a local level unless you include the communities. And if there is that prevailing attitude, particularly something like this, that has to be the bailiwick of government, that top-down approach, well, it's not going to work. It needs local people to be involved, because that's who it affects. It's the young people, it's the farmers, it's the workers, it's the new communities in our area, etc. It's those that are, wanting to embrace a family life in a rural location, which has everything and more going for it in many respects than cities. But we have challenges of, a lack of services. We have challenges of the connectivities that you might appreciate in the bigger areas. We have challenges of marginalisation when it comes to infrastructure development, where you're constantly having to bat above the average here to get recognition and to get notice. But if you take issues like climate affecting a rural area, well, it's affecting the heart of our region, which is the agricultural industry, which, unless it is managed, unless we can take these steps now, find ways to do things, embrace all actions, whether it's at a local level, regional, and national level, we can do this together. And, we're very much indebted to Department of Foreign Affairs, the Reconciliation Fund, for, taking this punt on this project and being able to see here, well, what we're actually doing is, through peace and reconciliation, you're building positive linkages in a different way by finding this common issue that we have, climate action. If you're to ask young people in the border region, and what we've done this in work that we've been doing with communities over the last number of years, asking them, well, what is the key issues that you face? You don't hear this to the same extent, the issues of the green and orange coming from young people that have been born outside of the troubles, the conflict, that they would know of, that I know of and come through on the island. But their issues is those topical issues that they say Greta Thunberg talking about, climate action, climate change, and that's what they're animated about, and that's where they can make a real difference. And it's their tomorrows that we are faced with managing here in terms of sustainable development, and we should give them their rightful place rather than just being senior people in corridors of power telling us what we have to do. And I think we're in the start of that journey, if I may, and this is the start of a small project that we're doing. And what we would like to see is that hopefully it's going to be a success and it can be replicated across the border region, and a bit of greater recognition from the authorities and the powers that be.
Yeah. Aoife, the collaboration, the land ownership issue with wetlands, or I'm wondering about how communities tackle that at the local level.
Yeah, so I suppose the land ownership issues with peatlands, it varies. So, obviously we have some peatlands that are owned by the state through National Parks and Wildlife Service. So a lot of the community groups that we'd be engaged with, they are near a designated a protection site that's owned by National Parks and Wildlife Service. And then there's also the Board sites as well that are currently going through restoration processes. And then on top of that as well, you could have private landowners that just own peatland sites. And then there's also community trusts that also own peatland sites. So it varies widely, and it really depends on the context of the peatland. And so every community that we're engaged with has a very different experience depending on who the landowner is. It's very rare that you come across a community that has ownership of the peatland. With regard to issues like turbary rights and things like that, trying to find out who has Turbary rights on certain pieces of land can be incredibly difficult. And our communities do struggle with that, and they have to work with, the Land Commission and things like that to try and, if they want to do something with the peatland itself, to try to identify the owners, speak with people in the area that they know are owners who could be interested in developing the space as an amenity or be involved in a project. So issues like that, and particularly around the restoration process of peatlands, the phrase rewetting is used quite a lot, and that startles so many people, because when they think of rewetting, they think of flooding, they think their land is going to be flooded, when it actually has the opposite effect, because once you start to rewet the bog, it starts to absorb the water, so it reduces risk of flooding. So around like bringing landowners, farmers on board, a lot of the communities literally go door to door and speak with people, or they already have someone within their group who is a landowner or a farmer who has interest in this and is, I suppose, the rep to go and speak to other local farmers if there's issues on that. But in terms of like the state agencies like National Parks and Wildlife and Board Namona, the community groups engage directly with them. National Parks and Wildlife Service have been fantastic engaging communities. They've recently just finished up the Living Bog project. They had a conference there just this week on that, and they were working with various communities for the last number of years on restoration projects and putting in recreational facilities. So one of them was Clara Bog, and they've put in a walkway there, and the community are absolutely they're delighted. They're over the moon because now they have another walkway as part of Clara Bog to showcase certain aspects of the bog that we never would have seen before. There's a natural limestone hill in the middle of the bog. It's just a natural formation, so things that you wouldn't really consider. So they've been able to showcase that. So it's really, you're trying to get communities to work with the agencies that are involved, the landowners that are involved, and like obviously it comes with its challenges, and it's about giving them the skills to negotiate all of those challenges. And through the Community Wetlands Forum, a lot of our other communities already have experience being able to have these conversations with state agencies, with landowners, and the beauty of it is they learn from one another, and they can the community groups across different counties can speak with one another about their experiences and exchange that knowledge and information with one another and support each other on that journey. And that's worked really well for the Community Wetlands Forum, and we're putting that into this project, connecting communities with peatlands through a mentoring program. So that's going to just be piloted. So we're trying to, transfer all of that experience over to newer groups that are just forming now, mostly around Board Namona bogs, as they become spaces to be rewetted, and communities, they're keen to have them included in their communities, and that they're like, oh, well, this could be a good amenity for us. Shane was saying, the pandemic has really highlighted the health and wellness and getting out and walking, and communities want to have more of that recreational space around them, and the benefits of that it provides to them. So, there's a lot of these things that are happening at the moment, and engaging with the landowners is part of that process. And it's not without its challenges, but it is doable. And we have those examples of seeing it being done, which is a great inspiration to the rest of the communities that are in the Midlands. So it's achievable. It takes a lot of work, but it is achievable.
I guess I'm curious, before you move off it, Aoife, and what are the climate benefits? And is that part of what you're, is that something that is what you engage with people on? Or is it those other community benefits that are much easier, where they meet a need locally?
Yeah, so we tend to just try and support them with both. One of the main aims, I suppose, of the project is to support, looking at bogs as a space for carbon sinks, to expand the biodiversity in the area, and to build an appreciation of that. but also being very aware that communities have their own wants, needs to move forward. So trying to, I suppose, give them an idea of plans they can do. A lot of it is recreational, a lot of it is amenity based of what they want to be able to achieve. Some may have an interest in biodiversity and want to incorporate that into it. So we try and do it halfway because it's achievable to have the recreational space while also, restoring a peatland or doing some kinds of works to be able to improve the biodiversity. Peatland restoration is quite expensive, especially depending on the structure of the bog, whether it's completely cut over, or if it has been drained, and you can block up drains and re-wet, and that will begin the process of storing carbon. And as part of this project, we are trying to share the information with communities that, this can be environmentally beneficial for your community while you also have a facility and amenity beside you that could promote ecotourism in the area, slow tourism, but also create an amenity for people living locally who want to get out and exercise and walk and enjoy the benefits that a bog can have. It's so fascinating to speak with people who have a spiritual affinity to the bog, and they will go out and really really enjoy it on that level. But then you're also going to have people that just want to go out and get fresh air and exercise, go for a run, things like that. So yeah, it's it's a really interesting question. Yeah,
You're kind of increasing at the same time there what some people call eco-literacy. And I was thinking, is that what's happening to the young people as well, Morgan? Are we able to raise an eco-literate, the young people of the whole island, if they understand what Aoife was just able to explain about the carbon sink, about the benefit to community, about is eco-literacy, and how does that fit in? Because I know on other episodes we've gotten deeply into talking about technical literacy, digital literacy, and so that's getting a lot of attention and a lot of funding in rural areas about connectivity. But that eco-literacy, and to you, Aoife, you've really, really engaged in that. But Morgan, I'm just wondering, maybe there's specific projects that the young people engage in that they're sharing, and collaborating on, that you could tell us about, that maybe
Sure.
are outputs of that.
Yeah, I think eco literacy is huge with young people right now, especially because there's not one. Climate change is not a subject that's necessary in school. It kind of is fit into geography or maybe a year. One group of students that we're working with at Galway Community College of Further Education, they have taken it upon themselves to rewild a field that's close to their school, while also publishing a book that talks about the endangered species that either should be there or shouldn't be there. And that publication can then be spread to other young people or other people in the community to use. And although the type of wildlife and the type of biodiversity that is in that field in Galway is very specific, what they're doing might be able to be replicated by other young people or other community members in different parts of the island. So that sharing of information is really important between the young people. Like Aoife was saying, the best is sharing best practices. It's important for communities everywhere. But yeah, I think having these kind of forums for students to learn outside of the classroom only enhances their eco-literacy and their environmental education.
Shane, in terms of the communities that you've been trying to target with this, is that part of it? And is the relationship, like Aoife was talking about, do you talk first to people about climate benefits, or do you talk first to people about their immediate needs, or that same balance that Aoife is trying to strike, and the balance even in Morgan's education to the interesting, you say it's not on the curriculum, directly to talk about climate change, but yet is it actually going to be really relevant to what young people are going to need, going forward? Are you beginning to find those links to the community benefit and the, what are the maybe side benefits of that? Is eco-literacy one of them?
I think the key really for us is to engage the community on their general needs and issues first of all, before we have those conversations about climate and about those responses and environmental issues, that we understand what they are facing in their area. And I would imagine, just as I'd said earlier, it's probably similar issues to other parts of our big rural central border region. But there will be the specifics that is impacting on this particular sub-regional area. And a challenge that we are facing is that we recognize that we're coming out of a pandemic in which communities have been closed. They've been closed within themselves and they've been closed to each other. Community groups, community associations, in many instances, have not been meeting or have not been meeting as regularly. And there are still a lot of people in the country, obviously, on a daily basis that are still dealing with the ramifications of what we've been coming through. But that when you delve down into the issues, and then we will find out what are the climate challenges, I think one of the terms that we use is that these are not burdens, but they're opportunities. An opportunity to make your area more beautiful, more accessible, more attractive for you, for visitors, for others. But yeah, I think that area, and Eva was talking about it, what we appreciate as an Irish people is social opportunities. We're a social people. We like to talk, we like to communicate about those issues that we face that are local, whether it's growing up in the stories of the peatlands and things, or whether it's appreciating the lochs and those amenities. But we haven't had those opportunities to engage. And I suppose we'll see what will entail. Will it be a huge energy, a huge rush for people? Yeah, I really want to get back into things. And that may be for some parts of our population. But for others, it could be daunting. It could be challenging, opening up again. And, is life going to be normal like it was before? But nevertheless, life has to go on. And our young people provide that energy. And they are more literate, in terms of the eco challenges and the environmental challenges. And they haven't been sitting idle during the pandemic. But yeah, it's that we're hoping to tap into. But appreciating that if you are dealing with an issue, such as a climate challenge or a local environmental issue, it can be daunting to do it on your own. But that collective of the community that we're used to as Irish people provides you with that strength, that support, that resource, and that's the asset. And then you take an area such as ours or in the Midlands and you bring together a number of different communities. That enhances that sense that it's not just our problem. The problem shared is the problem halved at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the collaboration has been coming through very strongly as a theme, the partnerships that each of your organisations have as well. But yeah, how do we create those community assets in a way that we have, going back to the very first question, I suppose, Aoife, that you answered about what is just transition. If we're asking civil society, all these voluntary associations, huge, as you say, skills and ability to do things in communities, and, the incredibly inspiring projects that do come out of communities, are the Where does the I suppose that collaboration ensure justice, ensure equality in the transition?
Yeah, like it's interesting. Shane, actually, you mentioned something earlier that I think it's very prevalent across all of Ireland in terms of community groups, and kind of grassroots efforts are really, really key, I think, in this process. And giving community groups that access to funding opportunities that are not hindering or overwhelming or difficult, because a lot of the projects that we're trying to support, or the communities that we're trying to support to develop projects themselves, and accessing funding is one of the biggest things. So for things to happen on a collaborative level, but also at a grassroots level, there needs to be better access to funding, and the funding process, and understanding the funding process, and kind of removing hurdles that deter community groups from even applying for funding in the first place. Particularly if there's a match funding condition, things like that just cause a lot of difficulty there. So I think, if we empower the communities to be able to take that initial step, we can encourage more collaboration with agencies and other initiatives in the areas. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that needs to be addressed going forward. We hear it doesn't really matter what area of community work that you're in, it is across the board. And then, as I was saying, earlier, for just transition to be just, it needs to come from a bottom up approach rather than top down, because you are going to get people saying, well, who are you to tell me to go and do something in my community, and you've never lived here? And some man up in Dublin, the famous phrase that I always hear is, someone up in Dublin is telling me what to do. And that's like, people would look at that as a throwaway kind of phrase, and I'm like, but there's meaning in it. There's something really significant about that, someone saying that, and it means what they are trying to say is, we want to be able to lead out on this ourselves. We want it to be grass ups. We want a bottom up approach. We want to be able to do it from our own community, and not someone coming in and telling me what we have to do. So I think that's really important, to be able to create that collaborative approach then with other agencies and local authorities and Leader and all of these other places, is that, community needs to have its place as being the guiding point of how things are going to change, and how the transition is going to go, and to make it fair.
Fantastic. Shane, did you have a last comment as we wind up our conversation about what Aoife's just said?
No, just to totally agree with it, with what Aoife's saying about opportunities and providing opportunities. That's what I suppose our project is about. It's about ourselves and task being able to help the community analyse what the needs and issues are, and to explore solutions. But what they do with those solutions and how they take them forward is going to be done at their pace. And it has to be respectful to that pace, as I just said, coming out of a pandemic, and different people being at different stages of readiness. So for our localities, it's a great opportunity here to get a head start. It's an opportunity to gather the evidence, which is so important, and which can be a big challenge. As Aoife says, the funding bodies demand so much. You have to have a well clued in community, and a community with the right evidence, identification of need, etc., and expressed in a way that is going to get at the brownie points when it comes to your funding application being assessed. And this is an opportunity for that area, and hopefully there'll be more opportunities for other areas in the work that we do and others like us are doing, to try and prepare communities for opportunities that are ahead. So you take, for example, in the border region, we've got the Peace Plus programme coming out now, with over 1 billion of support from both governments and the EU to deal with many of these issues. And that program will provide opportunities for communities to be able to put in applications to deliver solutions. And it's perhaps the last peace program, or the last, it's got Interreg monies, North-South cross-border collaboration monies. It might be the last such program, but hopefully not. Hopefully there will be something to replace it in, well, still 5, 6, 7 years' time anyway, when it completes. But it's a fantastic opportunity to maybe make a difference, to maybe address the needs that you have locally. And unlike maybe other Interreg programs that we've been more involved in, the new program is to provide greater opportunities for communities rather than just the big organizations staffed by professionals who are adept at putting together funding applications. And hopefully this program will provide the supports for communities to be able to put their best case forward to deal with such issues. And hopefully there will be that receptiveness from the governments to realise that, yeah, when it comes to issues like this and climate actions locally, well, people can make a difference. So, yeah, I totally agree there with what Eve was saying about the funding opportunities and the challenges associated with those.
Thank you. Morgan, we might let you have a last reflection on the opportunities that young people are taking. And
yeah, I mean, we kind of touched a little bit on the challenges coming out of a pandemic. And I think a really big challenge with especially young people is that lack of face-to-face interaction with their peers, not only within their school, but our program is based on collaboration, that face-to-face interaction with peers across the island. And since our first part of this program is all online learning, that was one way we were able to kind of circumvent that challenge. But now as we're moving into the social action and coming out of the pandemic, creating those meaningful opportunities for students to come together and brainstorm and share ideas and best practices. That's what we're focusing on now, and hopefully for the rollout, the full rollout in September school year, we'll be able to start those interactions right off the bat.
Fantastic. And I think that's a lovely phrase. There were a few lovely phrases throughout this conversation. Landscapes of opportunity and collaboration and meaningful connection, meaningful ways. But especially, I think I'm struck by having the facilitator, having the person there in each of you that is the glue to connect, having that be part of what you've managed to get funded, is actually the convening of the communities, the convening of the young people in that. And that does seem to be a really vital role, and something that, as Shane said earlier, some of these things could be mainstreamed, replicated and accelerated so that communities can go at their own pace, but that there is support for an acceleration of the needed transitions as we go forward. So thank you so much to each of you. I wish you very well in your projects, some of which I'm loosely involved in other ways. So in a different episode, I might be talking a bit more about just transition. But thank you very much for coming along today.
You have been listening to Across Divides. Learn more about today's topic and find opportunities to get involved at icommunityhub.org. iCommunity is a joint initiative of the Wheel and NICFA and is supported by the Northern Ireland Department for Communities, the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund and the Shared Island Unit in the Department of the Taoiseach.